Senator Rosen, who again I had to supersede, uh, but uh, it was something that she said is that Republicans can end the shutdown right now. They have control of all three chambers, the presidency, of course, the two chambers of Congress. What do you make of that statement? Is it possible, or as they say, is it possible for Democrats to join on and get to that 60? Whose shoe or the blame should be towards?
Yeah, I mean, look, the core of the issue is that whether you look at one side or the other to blame, it takes 60 votes to get a budget, but it only takes 50 votes for rescission. And when you're in this era of voting for something that can then be rescinded, it makes it hard to do a deal. And that is not so much just on Speaker Johnson or just on Majority Leader Thune. That's on the president. And the president has been obviously overseas, and the president has been talking about other countries like Argentina. And there's been a buildup of pressure and a change in the polling data that shows that Democrats and independents are moving a little bit farther away from Republicans in terms of where the blame is. But I think for your viewers, the one thing to pay attention to is now that we've had one paycheck cycle where air traffic controllers and others, haven't been paid or will be paid. We're moving to a place where maybe members of the military could be paid or not. So if you're going to pay members of the military, are you going to pay air traffic controllers? And if you're going to pay air traffic controllers, this thing extends. The closer we get to Thanksgiving and the holiday travel season, if there's a sick out of a dozen air traffic controllers across the country, there are about 3,800 air traffic controllers. That's less than we need. If there's a sick out of a dozen, that affects air travel in dramatic ways. And that's when you start closing areas around McCarran International Airport, and you start to close gates because there aren't enough TSA agents and there aren't enough air traffic controllers. That breaks this thing. But we're not at that point yet. So it is potentially record setting. And as we look at this, there's also the other component, and that is this is very different than the scenario in 2018 or 2019 when there was a sick out with 10 air traffic controllers, because it looked like we were going to have a short-term deal. That short-term deal for a CR, continuing resolution, was going to go until December. Now that's too close. So do you run one until March? That's too soon. So now we're in a place where this game of chicken is starting to really kind of bite, but you have about one more paycheck cycle for federal employees. And until that happens around Halloween or shortly thereafter, as we get closer to Dia de los Muertos, then we're in a place where this shutdown could really start to bite and harm air travel. That could have a dramatic impact on Vegas. That could have a dramatic impact on businesses and on commerce across the country.
I was going to say, I mean, how long or how many pay periods can federal workers not be paid before this starts to really start?
Yeah.
And it's always the timing of the year too, before this really starts to become
Yeah.
something that's critical for these workers to live, for the economy, and for these other jobs that are somewhat tied to them being able to get people to and from places, and of course, your mail delivered as well.
That's right. As you start to look at this and it starts to bite into a couple of pay periods. So you're past October 14th. Now you're headed to the end of the month, October 28th or so. After that pay period, things really begin to hit hard at home, where having grace for federal workers is going to try everyone's patience because the planes will be in a place where they can't move as efficiently and safely as possible, where you can't travel and move through the airport, but there's also interactions with dealing with federal government agencies, regardless of what the Trump administration says in terms of how that bites. And if you're going to have a moment where you're going to move into more than 10,000 employees that are going to be laid off, there's also some suspect areas of the law and what that looks like in terms of the Supreme Court and the nature of it. And I think this is an important element for your viewers to consider. The Supreme Court may stay a decision or stay an executive action. The executive branch takes action. They may stay that to visit that in January. Does that mean that federal workers are laid off or furloughed and then are in an uncertain place headed into the holiday season? Man, you talk about Scrooge. That is really going to be a tough, tough place because if the court stays an executive action and then doesn't visit it until after the holidays, that could lead to more and more friction as well. Right now, Democrats are sensing an advantage, and so they're pushing against Republicans. But the calendar becomes a pox on all your houses in very short order, just after Halloween and into the period as we head into Veterans Day and then into the Thanksgiving holiday.
One of the areas that we've seen this shutdown move towards is the president threatening to lay off a number of federal workers. And at the same time, maybe something to take into consideration as well as his desire to privatize postal service. How much of an impact does the ability, or what he, I imagine what he's looking for is the potential privatization, or maybe he's not looking for it. It's just a scare tactic, have as a driver into this. And what would that mean for these federal workers if what their job was became privatized?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now you have the mail being delivered, postal workers being paid as a quasi-governmental entity. As that begins to shift, and the president starts to really push executive authority to see how far he can get, the key component to this is not just going to be what Congress does. It's going to be the perception of public opinion, potential backlash effects. You know, Donald Trump is not on the ballot again. And that is one reason that John Thune, the majority leader of the Senate, has been interested in having some type of negotiation for kind of a cooling off period. The specter behind all of this is Speaker Johnson and what's happening with his side of the aisle. And if you seat a member from Arizona who's been duly elected, and you get to that discharge petition on the Epstein files, it's not going to be 218 votes on the discharge petition. It's going to be 250 votes. There's going to be a number of Republicans that are going to kind of have a domino effect headed into that. And all of these elements underlie what the president does and his attention to what is happening while there are threats that are going on across the world and in the country relative to the deployment of troops. This is setting up to be a real kind of coming to Jesus moment for the federal government and those workers who can't tolerate not being paid for the jobs that they're being asked to do. So the president and his team are willing to relieve them of that responsibility by furloughing them, laying them off, or firing them outright. And that also sends us into a place that is really murky about what is his constitutional prerogative to do so. He's pushing the envelope. And I think more broadly, it's the pushing of the envelope that leaves Democrats in a place where they are unsure how to respond if he moves forward and makes good on the threats that he's laid out so far.
And last couple questions for you. I'll set this one up. I was talking to good mutual Tim Rosales yesterday,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, pick his brain about the situation. I said, let me pose the Democratic talking point, which is you can't separate the shutdown from the healthcare conversations. They have to be in the same bill, in a budget bill, and you have to get this done now. And I posed the question to him, this can this not be what do you say to them who say this can't be a separate vote? He said, about as animated as I've seen him, of course it could be a separate vote. I think the big question is with the way that we do things these days with these omnibus bills,
Mhm.
can these two things ever be separated? Is there going to be any room for that? Especially as, if we're doing continuing resolution, it's not going to leave us that much time. We'd probably have to go once more have these conversations in about a month or so.
Yeah, the timing aspect of this is like, 95% of politics is about timing. And if you look at the timing and you look at the CRs, you can separate this out. Democrats don't want to separate it out because, again, there's this fundamental problem of 60 votes for a budget, 50 votes on a rescission. And they believe that the rug can be pulled out from under them at any time, and that it's not so much a deal that can be made, it's a deal that can be unmade. And it's the unmaking of any agreement that has changed the ballgame from 2018 to 2019. And part of this is Democrats are worried, as some Republican insiders are as well, that you don't have the president's full attention for a long period of time. So any deal you cut can be unwound subsequently, especially as you get closer and closer to the end time of a continuing resolution or a debt ceiling problem, which you face in February, March timeframe. So we face these short-term marks while you have a building kind of component of pressure on the discharge petition. You're closer to 2026. You have the Prop 50 issue in California. It looks pretty strong. And then there's going to be a series of constitutional and legal challenges. So it's going to be mano a mano between Gavin Newsom's California governor and Donald Trump. And that all lends itself to a whole bunch of attention on the sidelines from what is looking to do to fund the government longer term. And then there's the fundamental argument. Look, Donald Trump is changing the nature of executive prerogative as the president of the United States and pushing that envelope. And we are moving into a place that is unseen in terms of those consequences. And he's going to continue to push on that, whether that's about National Guard responsibilities, whether that's about federal-state relations more broadly. And as a result, it makes it really hard for cooler heads to prevail, to even have some side conversations. And that's to say nothing of a vote that you lose from Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, on ACA and healthcare subsidies. More broadly, if you're older and you're poor, or if you're older and low income, you're gonna hit hard in 2026 into 2027 with healthcare costs, and fundamentally that problem needs to be resolved at some point.
And the last question for you, by the way, the ACA. I mean, that was the theme I should point out too of Rosen's press call. She had three
Yeah,
people on who would be impacted, just to give you an idea of what her conversations have been like in the wake
yeah.
of all this.
Well, and
And where,
it polls very
yeah.
well. So
Oh yeah,
Democrats,
yeah.
yeah, that's why Democrats are talking about it, because it polls across the aisle, if you will, and that affects red states as much or more than blue states, and therefore they're going to continue to talk about that and couple those two things together, even though there's the 60-50 problem.
Right. And that was the focus of the press call. She had three the real people on, as she liked to say on there,
Yeah.
and sharing their stories in this moment. I think the last question maybe many Nevadans had is what do we expect in the next 2 weeks? Is there a roadmap? Is there a game plan of what to see? And is there a 2 week finale, or is this going to go on until November?
Yeah, okay. I mean, this is the $64,000 question, right? Will it continue to go on? Well, your viewers should pay attention to, are there any kind of back conversations that are going on to set forth, if you will, a short, very short term CR that could fund the government for a short period of time so that negotiations could begin relative to a slightly longer, but not long, continuing resolution that also deals with the ACA subsidy issue. So is there essentially a cooling off period? And until we get closer to the month and it really starts to bite for federal workers, and there's a lagged component to the economy that begins to affect about early November into mid-November. That's when things start to really bite economically, the holiday travel season, headed into the Thanksgiving period. As that period gets closer, things could really become insurmountable in terms of problems in home households, not just for federal employees, but for others, for everyone, especially those on a fixed income as prices rise as a result. So pay a very close attention, because these next 2 weeks become a place where, is there going to be an off ramp or a temporary pause to get something done so that John Thune, Mike Johnson, and others can have a moment to do this? The problem is, do you call session? Do you call into regular order? And what happens with that discharge petition on the background? And all of this kind of affects the negotiating standpoint. Nothing about directly ACA and about the politics of the shutdown, but all of this driving in the background the negotiations over a potential end to the shutdown.
Well, at least on the positive end of it, if it continues to go on, we get to keep talking to you. I don't know if that weighs anything more than what our viewers want to see versus maybe getting checks and that sort of thing. But
The only positive thing about the shutdown is that you and I are gainfully employed, and that just means that it's bad for everyone else.
yeah, it's one of those things where it's been so interesting to cover because it feels more so than ever, I think, before that everyone's so dug in their heels. And we
Mhm.
don't know what the background conversations are, those backroom conversations
That's
you're
right.
talking about, because publicly we see where everyone is at.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any room for those additional senators to jump in with Cortez Masto from Nevada to get that number up to 60.
Yeah, that's right. And there was, a week before the shutdown happened, there was, John Thune was talking about, we're going to get a deal, we're going to get this done. It might be just for short term until December, but that dynamic shifted. And as that dynamic shifted and the White House wasn't as engaged, there hasn't been a willingness to get this thing done. And as you said, everyone's dug in their heels. Democrats believe that because of the healthcare issue, time is on their side. The more fundamental problem is ACA subsidies in 26 and 27, particularly for key states like Nevada, But along with other states like Florida, like Ohio, states that Donald Trump won, and where there's a large number of retirees, like your neighboring state of Arizona, that's where if you're older and you are on Medicaid, if you're indigent or poor or lower income on a fixed income, these things are going to hit you really hard. And that's a tougher issue to deal with in a hard, fundamental way that Washington looks much more broken than it does solution oriented.
Well, again, Professor, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate
Okay.
it.